We're going to dig into President Biden's new interview with MSNBC's Stephanie Ruhle in just a few moments. But first, is the Supreme Court compromised? More stunning reports about conservative Justice Clarence Thomas have many Americans and Democrats in Congress calling for greater oversight on the nation's highest judicial body. This past Thursday, ProPublica released a report citing bank statements we haven't independently confirmed that billionaire GOP donor Harlan Crow paid for Thomas's grandnephew to attend boarding school. That same day, the Washington Post detailed correspondence in 2012 between former Vice President of the Federalist Society, Leonard Leo, and then Republican pollster Kellyanne Conway. Yep, that Kellyanne Conway. Citing documents NBC has not yet independently confirmed, the Post says Leo instructed Conway to pay $25,000 to a firm belonging to Justice Thomas's wife, conservative activist Jenny Thomas. He explicitly instructed Conway to make no mention of Jenny Thomas in the paperwork. The Thomases have yet to respond to our requests for comment. Leo told the Post that his concern was for the Thomas family's privacy, and Conway responded to the reporting in a recent Fox News appearance. Take a listen.
In this case, Jenny Thomas was one of my contractors, and she had worked at the Heritage Foundation. She was part of the grassroots, is part of the grassroots. She had worked in the Reagan administration. This is a serious person who for years had worked in public policy. And at the polling company, we did public opinion research and data analytics. We had no business before the court.
These reports broke just days after the Senate Judiciary Committee held a hearing on Tuesday focusing on Supreme Court ethics reform, a hearing that was partially prompted by Justice Thomas's failure to disclose other gifts from Harlan Crow, including lavish vacations and private plane rides, which both Thomas and Crow said they didn't think required disclosure since Crow didn't have business before the court. Here's Judiciary Committee Chairman Dick Durbin.
Over the course of several decades, Congress and the judicial branch have created a system of ethics laws and standards for federal judges that lay out the clear rules of the road. We are here today because the Supreme Court of the United States of America does not consider itself bound by these rules.
Supreme Court justices are the only federal judges not bound by the U.S. Judges Code of Conduct. Their verdicts impact the trajectory of our nation and the lives of hundreds of millions of people. At what point does reverence for the court's autonomy devolve into normalizing conflicts of interest and improper outside influence? Here to discuss is Democratic Senator and Judiciary Committee member Sheldon Whitehouse of Rhode Island. Senator, it's so good to see you. Welcome.
Thank you, Michael. Good to be with you.
Oh, absolutely. You have been very, very vocal about the need for the ethics reform on the Supreme Court, including potential legislation from Congress. What specifically are you interested in seeing getting done to fix what is clearly a problem on the court?
It's actually astonishingly simple. The Supreme Court should abide by the exact same code of judicial ethics that all other federal judges do, and should have a process for making sure that it is. At the moment, there's no process of any kind to make sure that they're abiding by the code of ethics. They get to call their own fouls. They get to define the code of ethics in eccentric ways, and nobody calls them on it. All they have to do is align themselves with what the rest of the federal judiciary is already doing, and at least the ethics filings problem goes away.
It's interesting because you can't say that there's not a problem, right? Because during the hearing, some of the Republicans raised concerns over the conduct of the court's liberal justices. So does this indicate whataboutism, or is this really space now for bipartisan reform?
No, it's a huge problem, and anybody in corporate America who operates under a code of ethics, anybody in local, municipal, county, state government who operates under a code of ethics, and every other federal judge knows that the behavior that has been disclosed about the court is completely unacceptable. So there's going to be enormous pressure on the court to fix it, and there's an easy path for them to fix it by simply modeling on what the rest of their fellow federal judges already do.
So
but if they won't, push in and do something legislatively, it's that simple.
Yeah, and so on that point, Senate Finance Committee Chair Ron Wyden recently said he wanted to press Harlan Crow for answers about those gifts to Justice Thomas. How could that impact the work of the Judiciary Committee?
Well, the immediate issue here is whether or not Justice Thomas has been complying with the Code of Ethics for judges. But if you look beyond his compliance, there's a whole apparatus of machinery, if you will, out there that is helping and facilitate these things. So when Harlan Crow is giving him these huge gifts, is he abiding by the law that requires you to report gifts of over $17,000? When Leonard Leo is funneling money through to Mrs. Thomas, is he complying with the laws that cover 501c3 corporations? Is it clear that there was actually work performed for that funding? So there's a great deal of investigation that still needs to take place on the outer fringes of the immediate problem of why is Justice Thomas not disclosing these gifts and hospitality.
One of the interesting arguments, Senator, that we've been hearing is that, none of this matters because Harlan Crow had no business before the court. You've accused groups like Judicial Education Project of lobbying Supreme Court justices and even paying to get cases before the court. Do the reforms you're talking about address that type of influence?
That'll take, I think, a little bit more work. The traditional role of the recusal statute has been to separate people where their friend or their person they're working with actually has a case before the court. But what we've seen in the last couple of decades has been a very, very robust billionaire-funded effort to control and influence the court. And I think if somebody with a case before the court ought to be the subject of this kind of rule, then somebody who is actually out to directly influence the court as an institution is an even more important person to get proper disclosure about.
So, Senator, I want to shift to Senator Dianne Feinstein real quick. She's been absent from the Judiciary Committee for more than 2 months now. In a recent statement, the senator said there has been no slowdown in advancing judicial nominees. Do you agree with that?
Well, let me say this. The rule that the Republicans have been applying to block Chuck Schumer putting a temporary replacement for her on the Judiciary Committee would also apply if she resigned from the committee completely, not just temporarily. And it would also apply if she resigned from the Senate entirely. So what this really comes back to is, are the Republicans in the Senate going to block our ability to have a majority on the Senate Judiciary Committee? And the only way around that without triggering that rule is to have Senator Feinstein return, which I hope she does soon and healthy.
I think to your point, Senator, the committee wasn't able to advance a number of judicial nominees at your last markup on Thursday. So was that due to attendance issues, or could Feinstein's presence have changed that?
I think her attendance could have changed that. And as her statement said, there are others who will move forward in the future when she does return. But do remember that the fundamental problem here is obstruction by the Republican senators who won't allow a replacement for her temporarily. And it's not clear that they would allow a replacement for her permanently on the committee, or even allow someone new onto the committee were she to resign from the Senate. So that problem of Republican obstruction persists across all of these different scenarios, except the Senator Feinstein returns to work scenario.
So, Senator, before I let you go, I want to play part of a new interview with President Joe Biden where he talks about the debt ceiling standoff. MSNBC's Stephanie Ruhle asked him whether he would use the 14th Amendment to declare the debt limit unconstitutional. Take a listen.
There are members of Congress that might be okay with us defaulting because they think it could hurt you more politically. Given that, are you prepared to invoke the 14th Amendment and blow through the debt ceiling?
I've not gotten there yet. And here's the deal. I think that, first of all, this is not your father's Republican Party. This is a different...
No, sir.
A different group. And I think that we have to make it clear to the American people that I am prepared to negotiate in detail with their budget. How much you're going to spend, how much you're going to tax, where can we cut?
Senator, would you support the president's effort to end this standoff by using the 14th Amendment?
I think whatever it takes to avoid the immense harm of a default is definitely worth considering and likely worth doing. We had testimony in the Budget Committee just this week that the two options that the Republicans proposed, one is default and the other is their terrible default bill. Both of them would cost hundreds of thousands, 700,000 versus 1 million American jobs. Both of them would cause recession. In one case, just recession. In the other case, severe and immediate recession. That is not a choice that the American public should have to face. And I will support Joe Biden in facing down the attempts to shove those unnecessary choices down America's throats.
Well, the stakes have gotten a little bit higher on those options, Senator, because 43 senators, Republican senators, including all of its leadership, just signed into a letter saying they won't support debt ceiling increase without spending cuts. So what does this fight now look like going forward between the White House and Senate Democrats in particular? There's talk of debt ceiling extension. The president is meeting with congressional leaders next week. But what's the strategy here if Republicans saying, nah, we're just not moving off of anything that doesn't involve spending, and the Democrats still insist on a clean debt bill?
Then it becomes a question of who blinks first, because the price of default is extraordinary on American families and on American business and on the economy. And I think when you look at the two completely irresponsible choices that the Republicans have presented, it is not going to be long until their business and industry friends start calling up and saying, hey, you've had your fun, knock it off. Let's get back to work. The president's offered to negotiate. If you disarm the hand grenade, do it. Let's get on with this.
Rhode Island Senator Sheldon Whitehouse, you've been generous with your time. Thank you very much.